Hi everyone, welcome to our episode 1 of 2024. Welcome to my channel. My name is Sylvia Kuchena. I'm a psychotherapist, author and founder of Horizon Mental Health Clinic. So today we will be talking about trauma, childhood trauma, and how trauma is impacting our life. Why it's so important to heal childhood trauma. Childhood trauma, if it's not resolved, it will impact the way we look at ourselves, it will impact our relationships, it will impact our belief system, our values, and it will become our norm. Because when we are when we don't have resolved childhood trauma, we are constantly living in survival mode. And that doesn't really allow us to expand ourselves, to get to know ourselves. Because one of the things that trauma does to us is disconnection. Trauma disconnects us from who we are. Trauma disconnects us from our authentic self. This is why so many people are afraid to even go there, to even heal childhood trauma, because we don't know who we are without trauma. And when we think about trauma, we think that trauma is something big, massive, like abuse. But that's not all that trauma is. Sometimes trauma is what didn't happen to us. So yes, trauma is something that happened, like an abuse, neglect, but also it's what didn't happen. So if you were if you were growing up in an environment where your emotional needs were not met, where you felt invisible, where feelings were not safe, when showing your emotions were not safe, where you had to hide a big part of yourself in order to be accepted, that is also trauma. If you didn't have anyone to comfort you, if you didn't have anyone to share how you really felt. Trauma is when all those experiences are happening, if those life events are happening and you have no one to share that with, if you have no one to bring you comfort, brings you back to the safety, if you constantly are on the edge of what is safe, what is expected from me, what do I have to do, what and how should I react, how should I behave, how even should I speak, if you're constantly thinking or were behaving like this, that means you were constantly in your survival mode. That is trauma. Because when you were in that state, you had to put yourself aside. You had to put, who you are aside and act in a certain way to survive, to blend in, to fit in, and to make yourself safe at all costs, even if it meant you had to lose yourself. Because as children, very often what we were, experiencing and what we were in it, we never felt like we could be fully ourselves, because we would get punished for our emotions. We would get punished if we were out of line. If we made someone uncomfortable, or if we didn't act the way someone was expecting us to act, we would get punished. And very often, we didn't understand. And if we did understand, what did we and how did we internalize what was happening? As children, we understood this as in a one way, as there is something wrong with us. If they don't love us, if they didn't see us, if they put our feelings aside, the message that we really got is we're not enough, we're not important enough, we're not good enough. So in that mindset, we started to create behaviors and starting to be behaving in certain ways to please others, so we could feel good enough, so we could feel that we mattered, that we're lovable, and we would be very much the good girls, good boys, just to be somehow visible, just to get some kind of validation. On the other hand, if that didn't work, what would we do? We would lash out, we would act out. Will they see us then? Yes, because then that's how you get punished. But at least your needs were somehow met because you were visible. So even though it was destructive in a way, you still got what you needed, what you wanted. And that is to feel visible by someone that you loved. So trauma is not always what happened. Trauma is also what didn't happen. When we think of neglect, why it's so hard for us to connect that with trauma is because neglect is not intentional. So your parents, your caregivers, if they neglected your needs, they did it because they were shut down themselves for their own emotional state. So they couldn't reach their own emotions. So for that, they couldn't see you and your emotions. That is past trauma, past generational trauma. But also with the neglect, there isn't intention. With abuse, there is. But with neglect, there is not there is no intentions. People do it out of lack of awareness. So this is the time where I want you to ask yourself, how many people did you have? Or who did you go to if you were sad in your childhood, when you were feeling unsafe, when you needed comfort, when you felt bad, when you didn't understand something? Who did you go to? If you didn't have anyone, that is trauma. And one of the reasons why trauma is so hard now to recognize is because we normalize our experiences. Trauma is, in a way, that's all what you knew. If you were growing up in a very traumatic environment, and all of your experience, majority of them were traumatic, we normalized that. We learned how to survive. We learned how to be and live in it. And we don't know any other way. We don't understand who we are without our trauma. We don't understand what the life could be without trauma. So we normalize it. Our survival mode, constantly being on edge, constantly overthinking, managing, organizing, thinking ahead, people pleasing. All of that tension that you have in your body, all of that, it's survival. But at the same time, this is what we know. At the same time, it becomes who we are, because that's all what we know. It becomes our reality. We don't question it. We don't question the experience. We don't question our childhood. We look ahead, or we look just what is in front of us. How do I manage this? What do I need to do to survive this moment? And that's how majority of us are thinking. We don't look back. We're too scared to look back. If we would look back, it means we would have to somehow look inside and face our emotions. And facing our emotions, it's not always safe. We're afraid. We are afraid of feelings. We are afraid of our emotions. That is also a huge part of trauma, because what trauma does to us is disconnection. Trauma is disconnecting us from our authentic self. And what does that mean? It means you have to put your personality, you have to put your emotions, you have to put the curiosity about yourself on the side, just for you to survive every day, every moment. So when you put yourself aside, you're on autopilot. When we are on autopilot, we don't think about our emotions. We don't want to think about our emotions. We keep moving and we do things just to survive. We don't do things to enjoy, to love ourselves, to feel compassionate for ourselves, to look after ourselves. Those concepts are alien. Like, what are you on about? Like, loving myself? Like that would be so full of myself. Immediately the inner critic, self-judgment kicks in. Why did we normalize that? Because we normalize childhood trauma. We only want to feel comfortable looking at ourselves in a compassionate way. It's because compassion is something that we don't know, that you don't know. Love, why love would make us so uncomfortable? Why would we be afraid of love? That is because childhood experience showed you that love can be dangerous, that love can hurt you. Love will make you feel vulnerable. Love can hurt you. So if they will hurt you, if they make you vulnerable, no thank you very much. You're closed off. You close off yourself. You close off your heart. I don't need anyone. I'm fine the way I am. I'm surviving. That's enough. Trauma is disconnecting you from who you are. And with that, when we are so much disconnected from ourselves, we're also disconnected from our gut feelings. And gut feeling is the inner wisdom that we all have. Trauma is stored in your body. The triggers that we will have and our body responds to, it's stored in the body. It's not in the head. This is why we always analyze. This is why we constantly trying to be 3 steps ahead. Try to figure out what other people might think. Thinking of the worst case scenarios. Thinking of the what if possibilities. All of that because we are in our head completely disconnected from our body. Because in the body, that's where trauma happened. That's how our wisdom is storing the trauma. So when we so disconnected from our body, we have no access really to the wisdom, the inner wisdom that all of us have, and that is our gut feeling. Our gut feeling is our navigator. How do we know if that feels right? How do we know if the decision that we're going to make is actually going to be the good decision? You can't, logically, like you can think of whatever, but you can't see ahead really. Your gut has that wisdom and your gut knows. This is one of the reasons why healing trauma is so important, why we need to really heal childhood trauma. It's because we need to come back to that inner wisdom. We need to come back and open our hearts. We need to start living, connecting with ourselves. Trauma is stopping you to open up, to get to know yourself. There's so many of us who are afraid of emotions. Like, oh my God, but if I'm going to heal that childhood trauma, there's so much. There is. But as a child, you survived it. What makes you think that you won't survive it now? From perspective of looking, the adult, you're looking into what happened, creating a distance so that you can feel safe, and then you can see trauma from a distance. You're not your trauma. Trauma is something that happened to you. You're not your childhood experiences. Yes, it somehow have shaped you, but that's not all that there is to you. You're so much more. But only you can open that up. Only you can really generate the feeling of I am more than trauma. Only you can truly allow yourself to feel that. There's so much that we holding on our shoulders. There's so much that we hold in our body. There is so much that we have experienced and we never even talked about. And then we wonder why we suffer so much physically, why our body is constantly in pain. Majority of your physical symptoms are somehow connected with what happened to you in your childhood. Trauma will affect your physical health. As much as it will affect your mental health, it will also impact your mental health. It will disconnect you from your gut, from the inner wisdom. So the question is yours. For how long do you want to be and live like that? Healing requires courage. But so does living. So many people believe that we are afraid of our shadows, that we are afraid of dying. Not really. I wouldn't agree with that fully. There's something more that we are afraid of. And that is the fear of feeling alive. That is the fear of our light. Let's be honest, like, we know trauma. We knew that all our life. We know we can embrace our shadows. How about the light? Who are you if you would shine your light? Who are you if you were confident and you would allow yourself to feel confident and be confident without being afraid of being judged? Who are you then? Who are you with your light? What kind of life would you have if you were not afraid of living? What kind of life would you have if you would really believe in yourself, in your dreams? Who are you if you were unstoppable? If you would love yourself? So, coming back to our question, are we really afraid of hating ourselves, hating our life, not really liking ourselves, not respecting ourselves? Or are we really afraid of loving ourselves, liking ourselves for who we are, not for what we have achieved, but for who we are? We're so easy to jump and judge and criticize. But what if you would reverse that? What if you would choose a different approach? And that would be to be kind to ourselves, to love ourselves. I too didn't know I had childhood trauma. The very first time when I found out that my experience, my childhood experience, were traumatic was about 10 years ago, when I started to work on myself. And when someone then told me, "You're so hard on yourself. You're so it must be very difficult for you to be you." And I'm like, what? I didn't, what? Due to all respect, but I don't know what you're on about. I'm not hard on myself. I'm just, I just know what I want, and like that. What do you mean? And then I've been learning about self-love and caring about myself. Like, self-care concept was something I really, really struggled. The things that I believed was self-care turned out that it was me being in my survival mode, managing everyday tasks. And I'm like, oh my God, there would be time when I would be like, oh my God, I did full weekend of self-care, and I would share it with the group, and they were like, oh my God, this is not self-care, this is just things that you ticked so you could feel safe, that you could praise yourself. But I cleaned the whole house. The house was cleaned. You didn't need to do that. And that moment was when I really had to be honest with myself. I had to be really courageous to look back. I was like, okay, something isn't working here. Something really needs to change. I'm really not getting something. What am I denying? What's going on? And then, step by step, I looked back. how I was when I was 5, how I was when I was 6, 7, how I felt when I was teenager. And all what I could remember was feeling sad. And all what I could remember was for me, as my child, my inner child, was to do things to keep myself safe. Any task, oh yes, I will be the first to jump. I will be doing it because doing it didn't make me feel things. Doing things, being hard on myself, didn't make me to be in the present. I was constantly chasing the future. I was constantly doing things so I could feel safe. My childhood was a nightmare. There was something I'm laughing, but I wasn't laughing when I was 5. I have grown up in a very abusive environment. And part of my childhood was sexual abuse. I was sexually abused when I was 7. And I remember even, years after that happened, I believed that didn't affect me. I believed I was all good. I was so proud almost that it didn't affect me. I believed it. I knew deep down it was normal. That's what I knew. But I honestly believe it didn't impact me. Sure, I was, I wasn't addicted. I was doing things. I still had my dreams. I wanted to do things. Only after I really stopped, and when I really looked into my inner child, I realized it affected me more than I realized. Because it affected me how I saw men and how I felt in front of women. It affected my confidence. I didn't trust people. Men or women, didn't matter. Didn't trust. If someone was nice to me, I was very suspicious. I'm like, what do you want now? I always had my guard up. I would never allow people to be emotionally close to me. I was actually very proud if someone was hurting me, and it was very easy for me to shut them out of my life. That didn't affect me. I don't care. I can speak to you today and I don't have to speak to you tomorrow. I honestly wouldn't mind. I didn't see that there was something wrong with that. It made me feel like I'm doing the right thing. Like I can cope. But deep down, I was very unhappy. I was looking for love. I wanted for someone to accept me for who I am, but not to get something from me. When I felt someone was crossing boundaries, out. I wasn't connecting with people because that wasn't safe. I didn't trust many. So when I was hearing other people's story, when they, about their abuse, I was thinking in my head, like, oh my God, thank God I'm not affected this way. But I was, in other ways. But only when I, as I said, had the courage to really look and be honest with myself. I only then realized it had shaped me, how I was in my teenager years, how lonely I was. And yet I normalized that. I had to, because if I didn't, I don't know if I would survive that. And that belief that I don't need others isolated me a lot from others. But for that and many other reasons, I have chosen to be by myself than to connect and to feel close. At the same time, it allowed me not to be afraid of men, not to be afraid of anger. So not only the bad came out of it, I also can now recognize my personality traits where I feel good to have them. Now I have learned to allow people in. Now I'm not afraid to be authentic, to show people who really I am, the way I am, not try to mask my personality. There was time where also part of the sexual abuse, where the coping mechanisms that I developed was to be perfect. I made myself believe that I need to be perfect, that I can't make any mistakes. Only then I will be able to accept myself. And that was about everything, about the way I was acting as a wife, mother, friend, daughter, everywhere. But then I got tired of it. I didn't want to be perfect anymore. There's no such a thing as being perfect. We can't be perfect. Perfectionism is just a coping mechanism, but it's illusion. It's exhausting. And we don't want to be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. But again, I had to teach myself that it is okay to make mistakes. It's okay not to try to be perfect all the time. So, not always the bad things are coming out of it. There's also a good part of it. But you got to choose what you're letting go and what you're embracing and taking as yours. But that is true to process, true to be honest with yourself, true to choose And be curious about your personality. Who do you want to be? Not for someone who is afraid constantly of being yourself. This is the first time that I'm talking about my personal trauma in public, in life. So right now, this is huge for me. I feel it in my body. It's like, oh my God. There is fear, but there's excitement. There is, oh my God, what did I do? And there is, I'm ready. It's okay. Either way, I feel it. But it's my choice, my conscious choice. And I'm okay with that. If through my story, you can resonate with me, and now it gave you a slight hope that you can heal your trauma, that you now believe that you're not your trauma, that there is more to you than just what you have experienced, that you can heal and still see and feel your worth, that you don't have to be afraid of being yourself, that you can be authentic without fear of being rejected or being used. That's what matters. It's time for us to heal. It's time for us to stop being afraid of being ourselves. Trauma is part of your story. But that story doesn't define you, doesn't define your worth, and doesn't define what you can or cannot be or achieve. You can be anyone you want to be. But the main thing with that is to be yourself. Don't be ashamed of yourself. Chronic shame, chronic guilt. So many of us have it. I had it too. Healing doesn't have to be rushed. There's many components to healing. There's many ways you can heal. But step in. Decide that you want to be yourself. Decide that it is okay to be yourself. You can constantly look for validations. You can constantly look for validations from other people. You might constantly think and feel the need of them to see you, to approve you, to praise you. But that will last you for only a certain amount of time. If you will start to believe in yourself and work on your confidence and work on your being authentic self and you validating yourself, that will last forever. It will not have time limit. The more you do it, the more it will stay, because that's how you're going to unlock the God. That's how you're going to connect with your body. You don't have to be afraid of your own self. You don't have to be afraid to feel. Feelings are messages from your soul. Feelings are navigators. Feelings are helping you understand the life. Just because you feel something that makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean it's a bad feeling. It means it makes you uncomfortable, so maybe there is something you need to look at. There is a message that you have to listen to. And you can only listen when you connect with your body. You don't have to name every emotions. That's okay if you don't know how to name them. Give it a color. I feel blue in here, maybe green on there. That's enough. Speak your own language. Our first language was never words. Our first language is images and emotions, or objects. That is the first language. If you don't have the words, that's okay. Think and feel the emotions without even trying to name them. You might not have to name them. But what you might want to do is to give it maybe a shape, a color, and that's enough for now. But connect with yourself. And there's so many ways that you can connect. But don't be afraid of this journey. You're not your trauma. And trauma doesn't define you, doesn't take away your worthiness, doesn't take away whether you're good enough or not. It doesn't define that. It's your perception of yourself that it does. Because if you believe and if you will decide today that you're worthy and that you're good enough and that you're lovable, who's going to say otherwise? If you believe that you're worthy, good enough, and lovable today, why would you care what other people are thinking? If you decide today that you're lovable, good enough, and worthy, even if you think of your past, the past would have completely different impact on you. It's you, your own power. You are co-creator of your life. And by saying that, it means you co-creating by self-concept. How do you see yourself? What do you believe about yourself? That's what matters. Have courage to be yourself. If you don't know how to work on, loving yourself, ask for help. Self-help books, psychotherapy, workshops, different things. There's many, many ways now that you can help yourself and start healing. But do it. Do it for yourself, for your soul, for your heart to experience this life. Not to survive this life, but to experience this life. And that is my intention through this episode. For you to even have the idea to connect with yourself and that it is safe for you to connect. For today, I think I have said enough, and I want you to know I'm very grateful for your presence and for listening to this, and I hope it somehow helped you or helped you resonate with your own story. See you in the next episode. Thank you for being here.